Before America hears what you plan to do with your $750 million jackpot, the television host smiled. Is there anyone you'd like to thank? The audience applauded. I didn't answer. I looked past the cameras, past the bright studio lights, past the cheering crowd. I was looking at one living room, one television, one family. My ex-wife stopped breathing. Her younger brother whispered, "Mom!" Lorraine slowly lowered the cup of coffee she'd been holding. It slipped from her hand. The mug shattered across the hardwood floor. Nobody reacted. Nobody even looked at the broken pieces. Because everyone inside that house was staring at me, the same man they had watched become homeless exactly 2 months earlier. The host laughed nervously. "That's quite a long pause, Mr. Carter." I smiled. I've been waiting 2 months to answer that question. The audience chuckled. They thought I was joking. I wasn't. Because 2 months earlier, those same people had stood on their front porch, watching strangers carry everything I owned onto the sidewalk. They believed they were witnessing the end of my story. They had no idea. They were standing at the beginning of it. 2 months earlier. People think marriages end with one fight, one betrayal, one signature. They're wrong. A marriage dies quietly. It dies inside conversations that never happen. Inside fears nobody admits. Inside silences that slowly become normal. By the time someone finally says, "It's over," the relationship has usually been bleeding for months. My name is Omari Carter. I'm 34 years old, mechanical engineer, husband, or at least, I still believed I was. 6 months earlier, my entire life fit inside one cardboard box. The company I'd worked for since graduating college shut down its engineering division. 300 of us walked out carrying our desks in our arms. One man cried, another punched a wall. Someone else simply sat in the parking lot staring at the company logo as if waiting for someone to tell him it had all been a mistake. I understood every one of them. Because when a man loses the work he spent years building, he starts wondering whether he still has value without it. When I finally reached home, I couldn't even get my key into the front door. My hands were shaking too badly. The door suddenly opened. Raven was standing there. One look at my face, and she knew. She wrapped her arms around me. "You lost your job." I nodded. "I'm sorry." She placed one finger against my lips. "Don't ever apologize for something you didn't choose." That night, we ate instant noodles in our pajamas. She lit a candle because our dining room light had burned out. She laughed. "Looks romantic." I laughed too, maybe because I needed to, maybe because she did. Before we went to bed, she took both my hands. We made our vows when life was easy. They matter even more now. I believed every word. Looking back, I think she did too. The first few weeks weren't terrible. I treated finding work like a full-time job. Applications, interviews, networking events, online courses. Every morning, Raven kissed me before leaving for the hospital where she worked as a pediatric nurse. Every evening she'd ask, "How many applications today?" I'd answer, 8. She'd smile. "Tomorrow make it 9. She never let me feel unemployed. She made me feel temporary. Then Lorraine began stopping by. At first, she was wonderful. She brought groceries, homemade soup, fresh bread. She hugged me every single visit. "You'll find something. We're praying for you." She never insulted me. She didn't have to. Real manipulation rarely begins with cruelty. It begins with kindness. Because people trust kindness. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and the conversation stopped. Lorraine smiled. "Oh, Omari." "We were just talking." I laughed. "I figured." She stirred her tea. "My late husband used to tell me something." I smiled politely. "What was that?" "A woman can survive a poor season." She looked directly at Raven. "Yes, but she should never build a life around uncertainty." She smiled again, then changed the subject. 5 minutes later, nobody remembered the conversation. Except Raven. Because that's how seeds are planted. Quietly, over the following months, interviews became harder to get. Savings disappeared faster than hope. I sold my motorcycle. Then my watch. Then my father's fishing boat. That one hurt. My father bought it after working double shifts for nearly 3 years. After he passed away, it became the one place where I still felt close to him. When the buyer drove away with it, I smiled until he disappeared around the corner. Then I sat alone on the dock, and cried like a little boy. That evening, Raven found me there. She sat beside me without speaking. After several minutes, she placed an envelope in my hands. Inside was nearly $3,000. I've been saving my overtime pay. I immediately handed it back. No, she pushed it toward me again. Read our wedding vows. I frowned. What? She smiled. Everything I have is yours. You wrote that. I laughed through my tears. I guess I did. She rested her head on my shoulder. We're still us. I kissed her forehead. I'll make you proud again. She closed her eyes. You already do. Neither of us noticed Lorraine watching from her car across the street. She saw everything. The hug, the kiss, the envelope. And instead of smiling, she sighed. Not because she hated me, because she was terrified. Years earlier, she had watched unemployment destroy her own marriage. In her mind, history was happening all over again. She wasn't trying to ruin our love. She believed she was trying to save her daughter from reliving her own life. Fear had become her compass, and fear almost always mistakes protection for control. 3 days later, everything changed. My phone rang while I was leaving another interview. This is Denise from Wallace Engineering. I stopped walking. We've completed our interviews. I held my breath. We'd like to invite you back for a final interview tomorrow morning. For a second, I couldn't move. A final interview. After 6 months of rejection, someone still believed in me. I thanked her at least 4 times. She laughed. I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Carter. On the drive home, I stopped at Sweet Magnolia Bakery. The owner looked up. The usual cheesecake? I grinned. The biggest one you've got? She boxed the last New York cheesecake in the display. Celebrating? I hope so. She smiled. Then I hope tomorrow changes your life. I thanked her, walked back to my car, and for the first time in months, I drove home smiling. As I turned onto my street, traffic slowed. Neighbors were standing outside, some pretending to water their lawns, others pretending to check the mail. My smile faded. A moving truck was parked in my driveway. At first, I thought they had the wrong address. Then I saw a mover carrying my father's toolbox. Another walked out holding the framed wedding picture from our bedroom. The cheesecake slipped from my hand. It landed upside down on the pavement. White frosting spread across the sidewalk. I never picked it up. I slammed my car door and ran toward the house. What is happening? The mover stopped. Nobody answered. Then the front door opened. Lorraine stepped onto the porch. Calm, perfectly dressed, as if she'd rehearsed this moment. Behind her stood Raven. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Mascara streaked her cheeks. She looked like she hadn't slept. For one impossible second, she took a small step toward me. Hope rushed through my chest. Then Lorraine gently placed a hand on her daughter's arm. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't threatening. It was barely a touch. But Raven stopped moving. I looked into my wife's eyes. Not at the tears. Not at the guilt. At the tiny part of her still begging me to understand. I walked right past Lorraine until I stood only inches from Raven. Then I whispered, Baby! Whatever they're saying. I need to hear your voice. Raven opened her mouth. Her lips trembled. A tear rolled down her cheek. She looked at me. Then at her mother. Then back at me. And just as she was about to speak, Lorraine quietly reached into her purse, pulled out a thick envelope, and handed it to me. I looked down. Across the front, in bold black letters, were 2 words that made my entire world stop. Divorce petition. For a few seconds, I couldn't feel my hands. The words on the envelope blurred together. Divorce petition. I looked back up, straight into Raven's eyes. No, I whispered. This has to be a mistake. She didn't answer. Not because she didn't hear me, because she couldn't. Lorraine took 1 step forward. It isn't a mistake. It's time to accept reality. I never took my eyes off my wife. I'm not asking you. I'm asking Raven. The movers stood frozen. One of them quietly set down the box he was carrying. Even he knew this wasn't just another job. It was the end of someone's life. I held the envelope toward Raven. If you want this, I'll sign. But I need to hear you say it. Not your mother. You. The entire street became silent. Raven's breathing became uneven. She looked at Lorraine, then back at me. Finally, she spoke. I signed them. Every muscle in my body went numb. But something about the way she said it didn't sound like a woman ending a marriage. It sounded like someone confessing a crime. I swallowed hard. That's not what I asked. Another tear escaped her eyes. Do you want this? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Lorraine answered instead. My daughter deserves security. I looked at Lorraine for the first time. No, you answered what you wanted. I asked what she wanted. The silence stretched. Then something unexpected happened. Raven finally looked directly at her mother. Not at me, at Lorraine, for just a second. It looked as though she was about to disagree. Then she lowered her head. Yes. One word, barely audible, but I noticed something. She said yes, without ever looking at me. A mover approached carefully. Sir, I'm really sorry, but where should we deliver your belongings? I looked around. My couch, my clothes, the bookshelf Raven and I built together one Saturday afternoon, my father's toolbox, the framed photo from our honeymoon. Everything I owned was sitting in my front yard. I forced a smile. I don't have another address. The young mover looked devastated. He quietly nodded. I'll keep everything together for you. I never forgot him for saying that, because kindness from a stranger sometimes arrives exactly when you need it. I reached into my jacket, pulled out my phone. I got a call today. No one spoke. I pressed play. Denise's voice filled the quiet street. Mr. Carter, we'd like to invite you back tomorrow for a final interview with Wallace Engineering. The voicemail ended. I looked at Raven. I didn't tell you because I wanted it to be a surprise. A tear rolled down her face. I wanted us to celebrate tonight. I glanced toward the crushed cheesecake lying on the sidewalk. I even bought your favorite cheesecake. She followed my eyes. For the first time, she noticed it. The white frosting smeared across the concrete. She covered her mouth, almost as if she'd just realized what this day could have been. I took one final step toward her. If I get this job tomorrow, if everything changes, will you still want this divorce? Hope flickered across her face. A tiny spark. It lasted barely a heartbeat. Then she looked at Lorraine. The hope disappeared. It wouldn't change anything. Her voice was almost inaudible. But again, she never said, I don't love you. She never said, I want someone else. She never said, leave me. She only repeated the decision, as though she'd practiced it. So many times, it no longer felt like her own words. I bent down, picked up the ruined cheesecake. The box had split open. Cream cheese covered my fingers. I laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny, because my heart had run out of ways to cry. I bought this because I thought today was going to be the day our lives finally turned around. I gently placed the broken box on the porch. I hope one day... You remember this cheesecake? Raven frowned through her tears. I continued. Not because it was ruined, but because it was supposed to celebrate our future. I turned toward my car. Halfway there, I heard footsteps behind me. Fast footsteps. Omari! I spun around. Raven was running toward me. For one breathtaking moment, I thought she'd chosen us. She stopped only a few feet away. Our eyes locked. She lifted her hand, almost touching my face. Then, behind her, Lorraine spoke only one word. Raven. No shouting. No threats. Just her name. Raven froze, slowly lowered her hand, then stepped backward. Watching that happen hurt more than losing my home, because I finally understood something. The strongest chains are the ones no one else can see. I drove away, without knowing where I was going, for almost an hour. I wandered through Atlanta until the sun disappeared. Eventually, a flickering neon sign caught my eye. Sunset Motel, room 217. The receptionist didn't ask questions. He'd probably seen that look before. The look of someone who'd lost more than luggage. The room smelled of old carpet and cheap detergent. I placed my suitcase beside the bed, then carefully removed my wedding ring. I stared at it in the palm of my hand. 10 years, reduced to a circle of gold. My phone buzzed. A message from Denise. Good luck tomorrow, Mr. Carter. Richard Wallace is looking forward to meeting you. I smiled weakly. Someone I'd never met believed in me more than I believed in myself. The next morning, I stood in front of the motel mirror. Dark circles under my eyes, wrinkled suit, red eyes from crying. I almost took off my tie. What's the point? Then, I remembered something my father used to say whenever we fixed old engines together. Machines don't quit because they're broken. They quit when someone stops trying to repair them. I straightened my tie, picked up my briefcase, and walked out the door, not because I felt strong, but because courage isn't feeling ready. It's taking the next step, even when every part of you wants to stop. Wallace Engineering's headquarters towered over downtown Atlanta, 32 floors of glass and steel. As the elevator doors began to close, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then something told me not to. I answered. Hello? There was only breathing, soft, shaky. Then, a voice I'd know anywhere whispered, Omari? It was Raven, and the very next words out of her mouth changed everything. I lied to you yesterday. For a moment, I forgot where I was. The elevator doors opened. People stepped around me. No one noticed the man whose entire world had just stopped again. I walked into an empty hallway. Raven, I'm listening. She was crying. Not the quiet tears she'd tried to hide on the porch. These were different. The kind that come after you've spent an entire night hating yourself. I never wanted the divorce. I closed my eyes. The words I'd wanted to hear yesterday suddenly hurt more than they healed. Then why? I was afraid. Afraid of what? She didn't answer immediately. Then she whispered, of becoming my mother. I frowned. What does that mean? I watched her lose everything when my father lost his job. I watched creditors take our furniture. I watched relatives make us feel like beggars. I promised myself I'd never live through that. Her voice cracked again. When Mom kept telling me history was repeating itself, I believed her. I leaned against the wall. So you chose fear, instead of us. No, she whispered. I chose the only future I thought would keep us alive. Silence. Then she said something I'd never forget. I didn't stop loving you, Omari. I stopped believing love was enough. Before I could answer, another voice echoed through the phone. Raven. Lorraine. Raven panicked. I have to go. Wait. I'll fix this. The call ended. I stared at my phone. She wanted to fix it. But some things can't be repaired by words, only by courage. I slipped the phone into my pocket. Walked into the conference room. Richard Wallace stood by the window. He didn't introduce himself immediately. Instead, he noticed my face. You've had a rough morning. I smiled politely. You could say that. He nodded. Then let's not waste each other's time. He pulled out my resume. I've already read every qualification. What I want to know is... He leaned forward. What kind of man are you when life isn't fair? No interviewer had ever asked me that, I answered honestly. I keep showing up. He smiled. Why? Because giving up guarantees failure. Trying still leaves room for tomorrow. Richard never looked at my resume again. He stood, walked around the table, held out his hand. Welcome to Wallace Engineering. I blinked. That's it? He laughed. I hired your character. The engineering degree was just a bonus. The job changed my schedule. Not my heart. Every morning, I woke before sunrise. Every evening, I came home to a quiet apartment. Sometimes, I'd accidentally cook enough food for two. Then remember, there wasn't a we anymore. Those nights were the hardest. Not because I missed the marriage, because I missed the friendship. Richard noticed I never left exactly at 5. One evening, he stopped beside my desk. Why are you still here? I smiled. I like finishing what I start. He nodded. My father used to say, success usually arrives disguised as consistency. The next morning, human resources called me upstairs. I assumed I'd made a mistake. Instead, they handed me an envelope. Inside was a performance bonus, 3 months early. Richard had approved it personally. Attached was a handwritten note. Never confuse temporary setbacks with permanent potential. Richard Wallace. I folded the note carefully. It became one of the few things I kept in my wallet. Across town, Raven finally found the courage she'd been missing. She drove to her mother's house. Not to argue, to understand. Lorraine was watering flowers when she arrived. "You came back." Raven nodded. "I came for the truth." Lorraine sighed. "I already told you the truth." "No, you told me your fear." That sentence stopped Lorraine cold. They sat on the porch together. For the first time in years. Neither one pretended to be strong. Lorraine looked toward the street. "When your father lost his job..." "We lost everything." "The bank took the house. My own sister let us stay with her, but she reminded me every single day that we were a burden." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I promised myself my daughter would never depend on a man who couldn't protect her." Raven quietly asked, "What if the man needed me to protect him for a while?" Lorraine didn't answer, because she had never asked herself that question. Raven stood. "I understand why you were afraid." She walked toward her car. "But fear explains a decision. It doesn't excuse it." Then she drove away. Lorraine remained on the porch, watching her daughter leave, realizing, for the first time, that she hadn't protected her. She had controlled her. That Friday, on my way home from work, I stopped at the same neighborhood grocery store. The cashier smiled the moment she saw me. "You got the job." I laughed. "Is it that obvious? The way happy people stand always gives them away." Her name tag read, Evelyn Parker. She finished scanning my groceries, then reached beneath the counter. "My late husband bought one lottery ticket every Friday." She placed one beside my receipt. "After he passed, I started giving one away each week." I pushed it back gently. "I've never been lucky." She smiled. "My husband used to say, 'Luck usually knocks after character answers the door.'" I laughed. "That's a good line." It kept him hopeful. I picked up the ticket. "Then I'll keep the tradition alive." As my phone rang, I balanced my groceries with one hand, pulled out my wallet with the other. The lottery ticket quietly slipped beneath the checkout counter. Neither of us noticed. 4 days later, the entire country was talking about one thing. The 750 million jackpot was still unclaimed. At lunch, engineers joked about what they'd buy. Richard smiled at me. "What about you? What would you buy?" I shrugged. "I'd pay off my mother's medical bills, help a few families, and still go back to work Monday." The table burst into laughter. Richard didn't. He simply smiled. "I believe you." That evening, after closing the store, Evelyn swept beneath Register 4. Something white caught her eye. She picked it up. A lottery ticket. She almost dropped it into the trash. Then she noticed the drawing date. Curious, she scanned it. The machine froze. A message flashed across the screen. "High-tier winner. Contact lottery security." Her hands began to shake. The manager hurried over. He replayed the security footage. There I was, smiling, talking on my phone, walking away without the ticket. The manager reached for it. "We need to call the lottery." Evelyn gently placed her hand over his. "No," he frowned. "What if someone else claims it?" She looked back at the screen, then smiled. That young man walked into my store carrying the weight of the world. He walked out smiling for the first time. "I don't know his story, but I know this." She carefully sealed the ticket inside an envelope. "This blessing has one owner, and I'm going to place it back into the hands it chose." The following Monday, I was reviewing blueprints when my assistant knocked gently on my office door. "Mr. Carter, there's a woman downstairs asking for you. She says she has something you've been missing." I frowned. "I've been missing a lot of things lately." She smiled. "I think this one is different." When I reached the lobby, I immediately recognized her. Evelyn. She was holding a plain white envelope with both hands. The moment she saw me, she smiled like a grandmother seeing her grandson graduate. "I finally found you." I laughed. "I hope I didn't leave my groceries behind." She shook her head. "No, you left your future." She placed the envelope in my hands. Inside was the lottery ticket. I stared at it. For several seconds, I couldn't even remember buying one. Then Friday came rushing back. The groceries. Richard's phone call. The dropped wallet. I looked at Evelyn. "You've been looking for me?" She nodded. For 5 days. Why? She smiled. Because miracles are too valuable to leave on the floor. 2 hours later, the ticket was scanned inside a secure lottery office. One official scanned it. Nothing. He scanned it again. His expression changed. A second official entered, then a third. The room suddenly became very quiet. Finally, the director extended his hand. Congratulations, Mr. Omari Carter. You are the verified winner of the $750 million Mega Jackpot. I didn't scream. I didn't jump. I simply sat down, because all I could think about was a crushed cheesecake lying on my driveway. The following week, television stations across America fought for an exclusive interview. Most promised headlines, drama, entertainment. One producer said something different. We're not interested in your money. We're interested in your story. That's why I accepted. Not to show America how rich I'd become, but to show someone sitting alone in a cheap motel that one terrible day doesn't get to decide the rest of your life. Across town, Raven had moved into a tiny apartment. Nothing luxurious, just enough space to begin again. She started volunteering every Saturday at a shelter helping families facing eviction, not because she expected forgiveness, because every family she helped reminded her of us. One afternoon, she saw a father carrying boxes into a shelter. His little daughter asked, "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" The father smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups just need a second chance." Raven turned away. She couldn't stop crying. For the first time, she finally understood how alone I must have felt. The night of the interview arrived. Exactly like the beginning of this story. The host smiled. The cameras rolled. The audience applauded. Then he asked the same question. Word for word. Before America hears what you plan to do with your $750 million jackpot, is there anyone you'd like to thank? Silence. 5 seconds. 6, 7. The audience shifted uncomfortably. The host smiled awkwardly. You don't have to answer if it's too personal. I slowly looked into camera 3. Across Atlanta, Raven was watching. Lorraine was watching. Her brother was watching. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Then I smiled. Yes, the entire studio became silent. I'd like to thank the people who made me homeless. A woman in the audience gasped. The host froze. Across Atlanta, Raven closed her eyes. Her younger brother whispered, "He's going to destroy us." Lorraine couldn't even breathe. Then I continued. Because if they hadn't forced me to leave that house, I would have never discovered who I really was. I would have never met Evelyn. I would have never worked for Richard Wallace. I would have never learned that my value was never attached to my paycheck. The audience remained perfectly silent. No applause. Everyone was listening. I spent months believing I lost everything. The truth is, I only lost the life that was keeping me from becoming the man I was meant to be. The host quietly asked, "So, you don't hate them?" I smiled. I hated what happened. But carrying hatred would have meant letting them keep living inside my heart. I wanted my life back, so I chose forgiveness. Then I looked directly into the camera. If you're watching tonight, I don't forgive you because you were right. I forgive you because I refuse to let my future be chained to my past. Across Atlanta, Raven burst into tears. Not because I'd forgiven her, because I'd become the man she had always believed I could be. No one inside Lorraine's living room spoke. For nearly a minute. Finally, Raven's younger brother broke the silence. He looked at his mother. You always told us a real man protects his family. He pointed toward the television. He just protected ours. Lorraine closed her eyes, then whispered the sentence that had taken her 2 months to understand. I spent my whole life trying to protect my daughter from poverty. A tear rolled down her face. And I accidentally taught her to be afraid of love. No one answered. There was nothing left to say. The host smiled. One last question. What's the first thing you're buying? I shook my head. Nothing. The audience laughed. I continued. I'm investing in people. I'm creating the Second Chance Foundation. It will help families facing eviction after job loss. It will pay emergency housing. It will provide career coaching. And it will remind people that losing income should never mean losing dignity. This time, the applause lasted almost a full minute. Even the camera operators were standing. 3 months later, the foundation opened its first apartment building. There were no celebrities, no ribbon cutting, no television cameras, just families receiving keys. One little boy ran into his new apartment. He looked around excitedly, then asked his mother, "Mom, who bought us this home?" She smiled. "I don't know him." She pointed toward a bronze plaque near the entrance. Second Chance Foundation. Founded by Omari Carter. She read it quietly, then looked back at her son. "But whoever he is, I think he knows exactly what it feels like to lose everything." Across the parking lot, I heard every word. I smiled, but I kept walking, because this story had never been about proving people wrong. It had always been about becoming the man life was trying to build. As I reached my car, I looked up at the evening sky. Then I remembered the question that had started everything. "Is there anyone you'd like to thank?" I smiled to myself. Yeah, there is. My worst day. Because without it, I would have never found the best version of me.